So we're going to start today with looking at the modes, a little bit about pentatonic scales, and then hexachords. For those of you who are here, you know this is my default screen. I've shown this before. But once again, I believe in this very sincerely. And that the more you can add to your music that other folks are not doing, the way you're going to have some success. Especially today, I think, because we're going to look at different modes and the use of hexachords. And it's a way to make your harmonic language more unique and get it out of just, three chords harmony. So we're going to we'll look at the most common modes. We're going to look at primary and secondary chords in the modes, some modal options. Then I picked 4 modes that are the most interesting, and I have some examples of those. And then a little modal interchange, some polymodality, some pentatonic scales, and then the second hour, or depending how we do with time, we'll look at hexachords. And hexachords, all of this material, actually, pretty much all of it, is in my book, which is called Composition: A New Approach, where I really get into that. So we're going to be able to look at that again today. So looking at the modes. A mode is a type of musical scale, is really what that means. So these are our most common modes. I know most folks understand this, but we're just kind of reviewing it. I don't have audio of this because I figured everyone kind of knows this part. But so these are the common modes that we say, right? Now remember, these are Greek names that have really very little relationship to anything that the mode does. It's sort of like Greek tribes or something like that. So Ionian is just a regular major scale. A Dorian is a major scale with a minor third and a minor seventh. So here it is in C, and here it is transposed if it's C with a key signature. Remember, all of the modes you can think of in C major, just moving some starting on C, D, E, F, G, and A, and B. You can think of them that way, or you can think of them as a major scale with added flats, and in the case of Lydian, added sharps. So we have Dorian, then we have Phrygian. That's the characteristic sound of that is the minor second for the second step, right? And that's Phrygian, or a C major scale that starts on E. Lydian is the raised fourth. That's the characteristic sound of the Lydian scale. Or you can think of it as a C major starting with F. So we have that B natural. Very bright. This is the brightest mode, really. The Mixolydian is a major scale with a flat 7, or a C major scale starting on G. These scales are used a lot in jazz, aren't they? 2-5-1 chord progressions. Aeolian is just the natural minor scale. So it's like a C major scale with 3 flats, or a C major scale that starts on A. And then Locrian is the least used. Also, it has a diminished tonic. What do I mean by that? That means the chord that's on the tonic is a diminished chord. All of these other ones are either major or minor. And one of the reasons why I'm mostly looking at these modes, because there's a lot of other modes, but these modes all are based on whole steps or half steps. So, I mean, you can have modes that have augmented intervals and all sorts of wild and crazy things. So, primary and secondary chords. This I do have some audio we'll play in a second. Remember that when you're using a mode, they have unique sounds to them, right? They have characteristic movements in the steppings, in the steps. So to get the most sound out of it, you should use something that uses that characteristic step as much as possible. Otherwise, you lose the flavor of the mode. Just like a major and minor scale, every mode has a primary and secondary chords. So the primary chords is a tonic chord plus 2 dominant equivalents. Now, what does that mean by dominant equivalents? It just means they are major or minor triads that have the characteristic step of the mode. So for instance, let's play this real quick, Rach. This is the first one. This is Lydian. So this is just triads. Thank you. So let's look at Lydian. So we have the major scale with a raised fourth. The primary is the first, it's the second and the seventh, because they include the G sharp, they include the raised fourth. So those are the ones that you want to emphasize if you're writing music with it. Otherwise you lose the modal sound. And now these are secondary chords. Now the diminished triad, each of the modes have a diminished triad. The diminished triad is tricky because the diminished triad can easily sound like it's a dominant chord of, in this case, dominant chord of A major, right? Now you don't want that really. If you're writing modes, you don't want to sound like you're in a major scale. So you have to be a little careful with the diminished triads because you don't want them to sound like they're going back to a major scale. So you have to just be a little bit careful with their use. Sometimes you can avoid it. Now we have the tritone, which gives it its real pull. Sometimes you can emphasize the diminished triad by maybe not using all three pitches, maybe just having the tonic and the third and avoiding the tritone when you're writing with it. Now Mixolydian, characteristic seventh step. It's got the lowered seventh step. So the primary chords for Mixolydian is going to be 1, and it's going to be 5, and it's going to be 7. They have the lowered seventh scale. They have the C natural in this case. It doesn't mean that you don't use the other ones, but it means that when you're writing, that to get the, as I say, the most pungent sound out of it, the most interesting sound, is that you want to use the primary chords. Just like, you know, when we study diatonic music, right? We have 3 primary centers. We have the 1, the dominant, and the subdominant. All the other chords kind of will revolve into those places. So it's the same with the modes.
Norman,
yes?
I've got a quick question. You've said that diminished triad, I guess they all work as a minor 7 flat 5, but why would you look at them as triads as opposed to the 7th chord, because that tells you a lot more about the quality?
Well, I didn't include the 7ths in here. You could have 7th and you could put the 9s on here too. I mean, you could look at all these chords that way. And they all will kind of be more colorful. But even if you just look at the triad itself, without even the 7th, it still has that dominant sound to it. Yeah. But no, you can do the same. The primary chords won't change if you add 7ths or you add 9ths to them, really. You're still going to have, these chords are going to be the ones that have the characteristic sound. So are you saying, why isn't the dominant chord have less movement, or when as a 7th?
It's diminished, but it's not a diminished chord. It's got the flat 7. It's like it's minor 7 flat 5. But if you look at it as a triad, it's only diminished. But when you expand it,
it can be a full diminished 7th chord.
Well, if it is, it changes the function, doesn't it?
Well, it can. It just, the pull of the diminished chord is still kind of pushing to go up to G major. You know, this is going to sound a lot like going to G major. And you don't want this to be G major. You want it to be D Mixolydian. And so even if you have an E natural on here, then, you know, or an E flat, it would be E natural. So it would be a half diminished. It would be half diminished.
Yeah, if it's diminished, then the 13 is emphasized. But if it's minor 7 flat 5, the 13 is flattened.
Well, this would be minor 7 flat 5. Because the E natural would be we wouldn't put, unless we wanted to alter it. So you're saying if we add the E, then adding the G on top, you mean? Or what?
If you had the E flat in there.
Right.
It just changes the function for me, because if you look at it, if you talk about it as diminished, it has a different connotation harmonically than the 7 of any of the, you know
I do.
Which is kind of cool, because if you're looking at it in terms of primary, secondary, you could just totally change. I was wondering if that's what you're doing, because you could say, okay, well, it's not minor 7 flat 5. I'm going to treat it as a diminished, which gives you like another. Well,
the diminished triad can go to 3 different places, right? I mean, it can be, you know, it can go up a half step to 3 different chords. It doesn't have to just go to G in this case, right? Diminished triad, if a diminished 7th chord can go to 4 different places up a half step, you know, because it's a revolving kind of chord. But you wouldn't, if you added an E natural here, then you're changing the mode, right? I mean, that one could do it, but it would be kind of, now we're looking like more of a Phrygian kind of a, it really would be adding a Phrygian sound to it because it would be more here. However I mean, this can be used. I'm just sort of saying that if it's used in your harmonizing, see, a lot of the use that we're going to see of the modes tend to be melodic. It's melodic uses, and how composers harmonize the modes often are not in the mode. We'll see, like the next example is a Lydian scale that's harmonized with a major scale. So lots of composers do that. They use this primarily as melodic material. So it's just, if you're going to have your harmony as diminished, then just be careful that you don't have it resolve in that particular way. Now, the Dorian is the characteristic sixth step. It's a natural minor scale with the raised sixth. So our primary chords are 1, 2, and 4. And this is the diminished. And then the Phrygian, we've got a characteristic lowered second step. So it's a minor scale with a lowered second. So our primary is 1, 2, and 7. Okay? Modal options. This is just some terminology. So a purely modal passage is when you have a modal melody that's harmonized with chords from the same mode and the same tonal center. So if you have a E Phrygian melody, then the chords are all E Phrygian, right? But you can also have harmonized modes with major or minor scales. Melodies can be harmonized with different modes with the same tonal center. So you can have a melody that goes from D Mixolydian to D Phrygian to D Locrian, right? You're keeping the D center, changing the modes. Now you can have a melody that moves from one mode to another with a different tonal center. So you can have a melody that goes from D Mixolydian to E Mixolydian to F. So you keep the mode, you change the tonal center. You can go both ways with it, right? Now, polymodality, two different modes on the same or different tonal centers. Similar to that, so you can have a piece that is in D Phrygian, then it goes to E Mixolydian. You can change modes and change tone centers. And polytonality is when you have them occurring together, right? So you have a D Phrygian on top of a F Lydian or something like that. Lots of options that people don't think about too much. But people tend to kind of get stuck into one mode. But these are some of the options. So let's listen to this. Now I'll be our second one. This is Mio. It starts out, it's orchestral. This is a reduction of it. So you can see that here is a D Lydian, right? D, E, F, G sharp. And now this is harmonized here. Initially, this is just basically like a D major triad, isn't it? Right? But over here, he brings in all these major chords. Now these major chords are not part of the mode. Here's G natural, right? I'm sorry, this is in bass clef. But still, we see some of these notes here that are not part of, here we go to treble, here's a G natural that's not in the mode. So this is an example of using it, this little example is just in the mode. Here we have harmonized, and it's very colorful. It's lovely. Let's hear this one. Okay, and then it goes on to a new section. But interesting, isn't it? Interesting. Now this, lots of us know, this is various Mixolydian modes, right? So we have different tonal centers, but it's all in one mode. So it's polymodal. This is Gymnopédie by Satie. What rock band did this?
Blood, Sweat.
That's right. Blood, Sweat, and Tears. That's right.
It seems to modulate up a fourth.
Yeah, it does here to C. It does.
And then to F.
Yeah, it's F. It does. Exactly right. It's a very static kind of a piece. It really is. That's one of, kind of almost a minimalist kind of approach. But that's what Satie, Satie was a very strange cat, during that French period of time around Ravel and Debussy, right, the turn of the century. He played like in cafes. He wasn't really, he didn't work with orchestras. I don't think any of his pieces were ever played by orchestras. I don't think most of his pieces were never orchestrated by him. Actually, one of the Saties, one of the Gymnopates is orchestrated by Debussy, which is a really neat. I have it. I'll show it sometime. So his stuff he's a very eccentric guy, but it has a very kind of a nice charm to it. So let's listen to this one, please. Yeah, it ends in A minor. So, any comments? No.
Listen to that after a Trump speech or something.
So he shifts. I mean, it's not, there's some alterations in here that we could probably analyze. Looks like even F minor. He kind of does. He does some various things. It's not just the straight Mixolydian, but it's primarily and. He keeps this it's very hypnotic, and this is one of the reasons why Satie's music appealed to people, because in some ways people say, oh, it's like cocktail music, or it's, hey, Bill, hi. Can you get in here? We have a chair right here.
Sorry for the interruption.
It's okay. Yeah, sure.
Oh, no, I just wanted to say, Poulenc's music really takes the concept of bimodality, right? And
Yeah, we have some Poulenc coming up. Yeah, we do. You're right. It's a wonderful piece to orchestrate, by the way. It's a wonderful orchestration example in hiding in there. Yes?
So modulating in the modes is really no different than modulating and staying in just a major scale and going up.
Yeah.
It's the same concept.
It's the same concept. I mean, he changes the mode. He could change, he could go, as I say, one could do a variety of things. You could go from F Mixolydian, you could go to you can he doesn't stay in the key center, and he stays a lot in this beginning mode, but he could change modes, he could change the whole thing. You know, I mean, you can change modes, and you can change key centers, you know, and you can change, you know, any variation thereof. But you're right, it's the same concept. It's the same concept of modulation. Now here's a Phrygian mode. Now this is from Microcosmos. I don't know how many folks know this book by Bartók. Wonderful graduated piano studies. I think there's about 150 of them. And he wrote them, you know, he was a great teacher. Bartók was really one of the great musicologists and teachers. So he put, there's modes and also different hands, you know, combinations. So this one is E Phrygian, and it's just simple, very much simple, but we see him used right here, right here. We start right off, we hear the E to the F natural, right? That's the characteristic sound. So he's subtly letting us hear it right off the bat, and he, you know, doesn't shy away from it. But it's a simple thing, but it's a way to really hear the Phrygian mode. Let's hear that one more time. That's kind of an interesting piece. Now, because it's a simple child piece, you know, the registers don't have a lot of variation. Basically, someone's hands are staying in the same place. So we, you know, they're kind of the two voices blend in. But this is a very interesting way. Now, this is just one mode. But you could expand it. You could take E Phrygian, then you could go to A Phrygian, you could go to E Mixolydian, you could do anything you want. But it sets up an interesting colors. This could be orchestrated, and you could. And Phrygian mode gets used a lot, kind of implies some Oriental kind of modes. It's very, very interesting mode. Now this is a combination of Locrian and Phrygian. Now Locrian has a diminished triad as a tonic triad. So it's more unstable, just by its nature. So this is from Debussy. This is a trio for flute, viola, and harp. It's a wonderful piece. I don't know how many folks know this piece, but it's gorgeous. You know, Debussy and Ravel just were masters of writing for harp. Ravel wrote Introduction and Allegro for harp, just a masterpiece of harp writing. Has to be studied if you're writing for harp. And this Debussy trio is a classic of trio literature. So we see it starts with the C Locrian, right in here, starting in this beginning opening. We first hear with flute. This is what note is that for viola? C. That's right, thank you. And then he shifts. Here, this is a Phrygian scale, right, coming out of the block. He goes back to Locrian, and then here he goes back to Phrygian, here, and then he ends up here with sort of a major pedal that he then goes on to something else. So the great composers aren't like you, aren't like, I may say, they aren't like you and I, you know. Just want to let you know what I think, you know. They're not like us, let's put it that way. They're not like us. who would say, gosh, I'm just going to, I'm going to do low cream for the whole piece because I kind of like the sound and I don't want to think any harder. So they're shifting all the time and trying some new things. So let's listen to this. This is a live recording. Now viola has a chance. Plays very beautifully. Dovetailing. Let's play that again. Isn't that beautiful? I mean, I'd love to listen to the whole piece. So, but look at just in terms of, let's go back to Seminar 1. Look at the development of theme. Here's his theme, right? Here it comes back again, changing, orchestration change, right? Is he bored? No, he's not bored. Are we bored with hearing this? No, we're not hearing it. We like to hear it. We like to hear the flute play, and we like to hear the viola get a chance to play it. And then here, dovetailing. Remember that? Sharing of the pitch right here on the G flat. Then the viola, and then the flute sort of does a little variation. Maybe one might say is it connected to this figure? An ascending scale. It's a descending and ascending scale. This is a little fragment of the little motion that we hear the B, just an up and down motion from the G flat, probably connected to maybe this idea, or maybe even connected to, a half step in here. And then this is an interlude. It's a repetition connecting here. Now here comes the melody back again, right? Now the viola plays the melody again, slightly different key, right? This is starting on, this is C. No, it's the same key. It's just an octave lower, right? This is C, this is C. Viola is playing treble clef, so viola is playing a little bit high right here. This is high for viola, but the viola plays very well. This is a recording from Colburn, and then, I don't know who played, but they play well. Here is an octave lower. What happens here? Look, here comes the melody back again here in the same C center. So we've heard this theme once, twice, 3 times, 4 times. 4 times a lady, or something like that. What's that song? I don't know. And then look here, the viola has a little motor figure, a C. And look how it's kind of interestingly written. So I don't know. What's written, the viola should be going like this. Actually, the viola should be going all in one bow, all of those notes, which is basically impossible. So I imagine the violist is probably going because it's also staccato notes. So it's sort of contradictory a little bit, isn't it? To have the slur and the dotted notes. Why do you think he does that? Phrasing, okay. But what's he? How's he asking the player to play? I mean, what do you get when you combine? What do you get when you put a slur over notes? A little more connected.
Tension.
A little more tension with it. I mean, if he didn't have the slur, then I guess he's thinking the player might be too separate, too sort of marcato, or too aggressive. So by putting this, which I say is a phrasing mark, because there's really no way the violist would be able to do that at that tempo. And here, look at this, kind of an involved double stop. This is, it's not a difficult double stop because it's kind of changing, but he's got a lot of different parts moving here. He's got, this is stemmed upwards, this, and then stemming down. And here we have continuing the melody, and then this section ends, and then we go to something new here. Let's listen to this one more time, please. dovetailing there too. Oh, Basically there. Motor here. A lot of interesting stuff really to dig in. I mean, look at this. This is a phrase marking. There's no way this strings can play two measures like that in one bow. So interesting. Okay, now we have Clementi. I think this is what's the composer? It's Honegger? Casella, right, Casella. Okay, a little unknown Italian guy. But this is mixing up, we have C Locrian, but it's altered. See, it's C, D flat, E flat, F sharp. Now that would be Locrian, but then he goes to G natural. Yeah, so interesting. Then it's a kind of a altered, I call it a whole tone altered. Really, maybe we have E, G sharp, B flat, right? So that kind of implies a whole tone scale. But then he has some alterations. He has the A, and we have C flat coming back down again. So it, you know, I kind of hear it as alteration of these ideas. Now here, this is chromatic scales. You know, basically it's a chromatic scale, at least parts of this. So it's, you know, the bottom line is it's a combination of this, and this is an homage to Clementi, the famous pianist. This is again sort of a piece for study, piano study. Let's hear this one. Please. Well, hear that one again. I'd like to hear this on bass, please, Tom. One more time. One more time. Interesting. Yeah, it is a cool piece. It is a cool piece. Polymodality. So now this is, I'm going to play this, and the first person who can guess what movie this is from will earn a gold star. This is, we have X, not my daughter, because she knows which one this is. So we start, this is a combination. So we have B flat major here in the left hand, and we have an X mixolydian in the right. Here we go to C major in the right. Well, this is B flat through the whole piece. This left hand is unchanged. It's a ostinato. But the one on top he changed. Here's an E pentatonic with passing tones. This is the way I read this. So it's very interesting. It ends with a D major seventh over a B flat augmented 9 with a 12. I don't know how else one was going to call it. This is definitely D major 7 here. This is B flat F sharp. Okay, so that's augmented, right? I'm going with you here on this. Okay, and then we have an F natural and a C natural and an F natural on top. So I don't know how else you're going to call that high F as a 12th. I mean, it's not a 5th because we have the augmented below it.
Maybe it's a flat 13 instead.
A flat 13? Yeah.
Then you don't have a 5th.
Well, flat 13 would be That would be the F sharp. Would it be G flat?
Yeah.
So it's an F natural. It's an F.
The F natural is the fifth. And
Oh, you think this is this? Oh, you think of it that? Well, you could, I guess, even though it sounds earlier. But you're right. I guess we could think of it that way. You're right. This could be considered. That'd be an interesting way. But he has it twice, doesn't he? So he has B flat, F sharp again. Then he has F sharp again here as a grace note resolving downward. Really wild. Beautiful piece. So see if you know what movie this is from.
Is this percussive?
No, this is Poulenc. Guesses?
Gone with the Wind?
No. Not Birth of a Nation either.
The middle kind of sounds like the breakfast machine from Pee-wee's Big Adventure.
No.
Love and Death, Woody Allen?
No. Older.
Oh.
Can I say it?
Yeah,
It's from Rope.
by Hitchcock. Yeah, it's Rope by Hitchcock. You never saw that one? It's a very interesting movie. It's based on the true story of, I said, Loeb and
Leopold.
and Loeb. There's two men who kill their friend. What they do in the movie, they kill their friend. They have his body in the apartment, and they invite his parents and his fiancée for a dinner.
And they eat on.
Yeah, and they eat on top of it. You know, they put the dining table, the food on top of where the dead body is. And Jimmy Stewart, though, it's another Jimmy Stewart. Jimmy Stewart is their old teacher, and he gets invited. And he finds out what's going on. He senses something, and he keeps going. He's going. But there's also a gay element in there too. And the one guy is a pianist, and he's playing this on the piano, and he keeps getting faster because he's nervous and things. So, but it's a perpetual motion. Is really what it is. Isn't that an interesting piece? You know, a beautiful orchestration with this. So the thing that you have to remember is that, you know, during this period, you know, this must be the teens, the 20s, maybe the early 30s. I don't even think there was so much beautiful experimentation, you know, in harmonies. You know, like we tended to solidify a little bit afterwards, but I love this mixture of things. Now we'll look a little bit at pentatonic scales. Now this, I'm going to play this. So I'm only doing a kind of a brief window on scales. I'd like to do some more talks in November, and I'd like to get more into this because there's pentatonic scales, there's hybrid scales, there's all sorts of interesting kind of exploration of scales. So these are common pentatonic scales. Of course, a pentatonic scale is a 5-note scale. Is this the only 5-note? No, there's lots of different ones. These are just sort of common ones that we have. So let's just hear that. So it's all a variation of these 5 pitches. We could have many other ones. Pentatonic writing, we hear it a lot, of course, in pop music. We hear it a lot, actually, in ethnic music. Folk music it's the most common scale, 5-note scale. So when people are in film music, when they're trying to refer to ethnic music. They'll often use a pentatonic scale. A lot of instruments are tuned to pentatonic scales. I have a Vietnamese moon lute. It's a pentatonic scale. That's just built in right there. Lots of instruments, all globally, as I say, you know, all over. It's the most common scale. It's a beautiful little scale. Now you see there's no half steps in this one, right? Now this one actually does have half steps. So that's one of the things. Also the black keys of a piano is a pentatonic scale. So it's, that's where people play around a lot. You can just play the black keys. It always sounds like kind of works. So we're just going to delve into a little bit here. This is one example of pentatonic scales mixed with non-pentatonic scales. So now here we have a hexachord. Oh my Lord, we're going to look at hexachords later. What's a now? By the way, hexachord I could call it a hexatonic scale, right? I mean, hexachord sounds like it's a chord. I use hexachord meaning a 6-note scale, but I guess. If I wanted to be proper with my terminology, then I would probably call it a hexatonic, let's say, 6-note scale. So this is a 6-note scale against a pentatonic scale, half step apart, a minor ninth, right? Beautiful little color right there. Then we have a voice that is basically kind of working off the pentatonic scale. Then we have this little idea again. So this is a pentatonic, but he uses this as a little color. Now over here, he goes into octaves. So it's harmonized a little bit differently. Here's the D-flat Mixolydian scale. He brings in for some of this, and then he plays around with that idea, and then he comes back here again to his opening idea. So in terms of form, what do we see? We see this is an opening motif, right? Here's our melody. Dum, 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 right? So here, A, B again. Here's A again. Right? Here's an extension of B, isn't it? Right? This is all connected here, coming in here. So this is an extension of B. Now here is a new thing, right? C. This is C. This is kind of a new connection. Now here, is this connected to this? It's an ascending scale, right? So somewhat, we might be able to make a case for that. This melody looks like it might be a little bit connected to minor thirds. Thirds here might be connected to thirds. We hear opening thirds right there. So it's very much boo-dee dum ba do da. So boo-dee bum bo. So the thirds, it comes back again. This is obviously connected to that, right? And here's our thirds again. This looks like this is hearkening back a little bit to up here. It's the 16th note figures. And then here we have A again. So I guess we don't need to hear it. No, I'm kidding. Let's hear it. Nice. I'm going to close this window.
You don't cut your grass and stuff out here, the fire department comes and cuts it. And
Right. So interesting piece, huh? Very, very moody, very beautiful changes that he gets. Now the singer, she's going to have to get her pitches from the C sharp here, right? And this is not going to help her very much, right? But so yeah, I think we can listen to it again. So it doesn't really matter, but yes. So these are, the pitch would come from here. It's a simple, it's kind of a simple idea, but look at all the beautiful colors. I mean, we could analyze, this is all half steps too. There's a C sharp and B are whole steps. So we have these whole steps here against octaves. So it's very, it's on paper it looks simple, but as if we dove in, we'd see a lot of complexity. But look at this. Here's a B that keeps getting repeated here. So there's sort of a drone of a B, B's here, octaves, B's continue through here. So he's got a lot of different centers to this thing that you have to really, and actually this whole chord is being repeated, isn't it? We have, what is that, A sharps in B. So we have so A sharps, again it's the minor ninth, the same relationship here. You think that's an accident? No, it's not an accident. So he digs that sound. So he has that sound, but then he has octaves here to sort of, to bring it together. So he has a dissonance. This is about it's one of the most dissonant intervals you can have, really, minor ninth, except maybe a half step. So this is pretty dissonant, but he's not smashing our heads in with it. He's playing it softly, but I think he has this octaves to sort of dissipate it a little bit, the tension of it. But it's all, and then he has this little melody here that he repeats and changes it, the little motif. Let's listen to it one more time without our outside drone, hopefully. So interestingly, here at the end, he reverses the voices, doesn't he? So here, the line that was on D, the pentatonic or hexachord, goes to the left hand, and then the pentatonic scale goes to the right hand, up an octave. And so then he ends up with a major ninth here, as opposed to the seventh. Or major, yeah. Isn't that wild? Very, very interesting. What are hexachords? Hexachords or hexes are basically just 6-note scales. Why are they interesting? Well, because you have freedom to create your own. It's basically a synthetic scale, is what it would be called in a sort of formal fashion. You create your own scale with any 6 pitches you want. You're not limited to a major, conventional, or minor, or diminished or augmented scale. If you're in a light mood, then you create a hexachord that has a lot of whole steps and fourths. If you're writing something that is a dark mood or something with some tension, then you can have a hexachord with half steps and tritones. Now, this is incredible variety, no matter how experienced. There must be 50,000 different combinations. I mean, I came up with 2 billion. Somebody told me that might be wrong, but it's a lot, okay? Maybe this number is wrong right there. I'm not quite sure. But if you think about 6 pitches and the 6th time at the 6th place, I don't know, you end up with a pretty large amount of possibilities. we're going to, most of us, this is what I think is important, is that for me, when I learned hexachords from a man named David Angel, and what it did for me is that it got me away from just playing writing what I could play with my own hands on the keyboard. And because I'm not, a real pianist, I was limited by some sort of jazz kind of things I did with a heavy left hand. So I could come up with my own material, but I didn't have, I was limited. So once I started writing with hexachords, I was excited as hell, really. And that's all I did for a couple of years. Everything had to be with a hexachord. And when you write with a hexachord, you don't have to sit in the, what chords do I want to use today, or what harmony? It seemed to fill a void for me in a lot of questions in my writing. And that's what I kind of want to share. Because remember, contemporary writers, we write much more horizontally. Right? It's not really chords as much. Chords get produced, but most writing is much more like counterpoint, 20th century counterpoint, where there's a melody and all the lines are kind of moving as melodic material, as opposed to somebody as a lead sheet, kind of having chords and filling it up that way. This is pretty common. This is very common. So when you start to write in more of this fashion, which is hexachords are in a sense like 12-tone writing, because we're not locked in to so much tonic and dominance. Your writing becomes much freer, and this is certainly a style that has been used for quite a long time. Now, hexachord examples. We have many, many examples. We have classical composers, we have film composers. Howard Hansen wrote a whole book about hexachords. They've been around. Here's some examples. We can play this. So a whole tone scale, Rach, is a 6-note scale. Right. So then I'm repeating the top edge. So that's a common 6-note scale, right? Very usual. Also, augmented scale, minor third half step scale. Many people have used it. Coltrane, lots of jazz players use it. So we have a minor third, half step, minor third, half step. Basically, we're dividing the octave into 6 steps is what we're doing here. Next one, please. Very interesting. Now also the blues scale, right? There's many blues scales, but this kind of conventional blues scale is 6 notes. We have a minor third, then we go to the 4th, up a half step, and then we have a minor 7th. Oh, I'm sorry, let's just hear that one. Now, we're going to get into adding to pitch if we want 7 notes. We're going to get into some more variations. But what's interesting about 6 notes is because obviously if you think about 6 notes, then you have 6 other notes that you're not using. So you end up, any hexachord, you have 6 notes and you have a pairing of another hexachord that is just all the other pitches in a chromatic scale. Here's an example of a whole tone scale piece. This is again by Bartók. Let's listen to this one. All whole tone, just one of his microcosmos pieces. There's a major third at the end. So, I mean, a whole tone scale by itself in one piece can sound a little bit monotonous, you know, and he tries to change that, I think, by changing the tempo, doesn't he? And he changes the register a little bit to make it a little bit more interesting. Now, hexachords, going back to hexes, this is where we are. This is a hexachord that John Williams uses. He's not the only one. He uses this. It's this 6 notes here: B flat. Where is it? Oops, I'm sorry. It's these pitches: E flat, F, G flat, G, A, B flat, written here, and it's he gets diminished chords in the strings. And it makes a nice little cycle. He uses this too, boo-do-dee, boo-do-pee. So this is, in essence, this is E flat major and A major as an inverted A major triad. So particularly when you have 6/8 meter or 3/8 meter, some sort of meter that has triplets in it, when you use a 6-note scale, it works out so well because the meter is already 6, and so you have 6-note scale, and it works well into a pattern. The thing to remember with hexachords is that it becomes one kind of writing. You can mix writing with a hexachord, with writing with a mode, with writing with a major scale, all sorts of things. Now let's dig in a little bit deeper. So the steps in learning hexachord use. First, you compose a 6-note hex, just any hex you want. Then we're going to build chords with each pitch of the hex as a root. Then we're going to write some more music, or you're going to write some music. Then you're going to count the intervals in the hexachord. That tells us what's in there, which we're going to do. They're going to write some music. Then you're going to modulate the hex, and we're going to, because of our intervals, that tells us how to modulate the hex. And by the way, these steps in analysis can work in any kind of harmony. It doesn't have to be hexachord, because I'm going to do with a major scale. Anything you can do this sort of steps. And then to add more pitches, we're going to build a harmonic environment of the hexachord. And we'll write some more music. So let's play this hex. This is my hex that I'm using for this example. Okay, it's, in essence, what it is a D major triad and an E flat major triad. Okay, it's combined together. Let's just play this one. Okay, good. So this is our hexachord that we're going to use. Each hexachord has its own unique sound, which gives you the distinctive language that you're writing for the composition. Now we're going to build chords. We have 6 chords made up of our hexachords. The quarter notes each act as a root. When we analyze these chords, we're going to end up with 2 major chords, a minor chord, a diminished chord, and 2 augmented chords. So the first one is a D major 9. So this is my hexachord in the dark, in the quarter notes. You stack fifths, right? So I'll go over it in a little bit more here. But for instance, so here we go A, E flat, G, B flat, F sharp. The voicing of this doesn't matter. I'm not trying to go for good voicing here. I'm just going to get an idea of what the chord is. Here's an E. We have 2 major 7th chords right off the bat, don't we? So we have a. I'm sorry, this is not a major 7. This is the D major flat 9. This is the E major 7. Here's an augmented chord with F sharp as the root. We have F sharp, and we have the G natural and the B flat, the D, the E flat, and the A. So it's an F, A with the B flat. This is a minor major 7th chord, the G with the B flat and F sharp. Here's an A7, because we have A. We don't have a third. We have no C in this chord, so there's no C sharp or C natural. But we've got an E flat, a G, and a B flat, and an F sharp. So we got a 9, 11, and a 13. And then we got an augmented chord. We have B, D, and F sharp with an A, with a major 7. We got some interesting chords here. Why do we build chords? Because this just gives us an idea of what we're doing. Even though I said in the beginning we don't think chordally, it's interesting to know what is there when you think of it this way. Also, you can use this to write pop music, or jazz, particularly jazz. So if you want to use chords to come out of a hexachord, this gives you our information. So this is how we build the chord. Let's use F sharp as the root. The next fifth after F is C, but there's no C in our hex. So we can't put a C in. So you go to the next fifth, so which is G. So you add G. And then after G, you go to D. Doesn't matter if it's flat, sharp, or natural. We continue this process until all 6 pitches are allocated, like this example. As I say, the voicing is not important. You just want to keep the pitches in the stave for right now so you can sort of figure out what you got. Why do we do it? I just explained that. Now, let's take the same concept and let's do it with C major, because that's our basic tonality, right? And we can do the same thing. Here's building chords using C major scale. Now, most of this, we understand what we're going to have here. Here's a C major 7th, a 9, an 11, and a 13. That's what's in the major. By the way, it's just any major scale, isn't it? Then we have a minor 7th on the 2nd scale degree with a 9, 11, and a 13. We have another minor with a flat 9, 11, and a flat 13. We have an F major 7 with a plus 11, right? So we have the Lydian sound is in there when we keep extending it upwards. Then we also have the G7. So here's our dominant chord. Here's another minor chord. And here's our diminished 7. So we understand, right? Now, by the way, it doesn't mean that every time you write with these chords, you have to use all 6 pitches or 7 pitches. You have to use them all. This just tells you what's in here. So we know the basic triads. We have 2 major 7th chords, a dominant 7th chord, 3 minor chords, and a diminished chord. So when we extend it, we have more color, right? So this is the same concept. And it's some interesting sounds even if you just play around with a major scale like this. So let's listen to some examples. This next example is all recorded live, which is nice. It's also woodwind quintet. Now, I'm only using my hexachord. I'm not modulating the hexachord. I'm not adding any extra notes to the hexachord. This first example that's called hexagon, I'm emphasizing the major scale qualities. Remember, we had some major scales in there. We have major chords, right? E flat major in there. So that's what I'm going to push on, right? It doesn't mean I'm leaving the other ones off. I use all the notes of the hex, but my chords are primarily influenced by that. So our melody is in the horn, and the rest of the ensemble is playing rhythmic passages all together, the rest of the 4 voices. Let's listen to this one. So we have some interesting color. Here's kind of an augmented. I'm hitting a little augmented chord here with the F sharp and in the melody and the B flat. So what's the difference between this and me just writing an E flat major? Well, I think there's kind of a lot of difference, isn't there? You know, I have F sharp that I can bring in a little bit. You know, I have some different colors that that wouldn't normally be part of your hexachord. Now, this next example called psyched, this pushes on, or I'm using more elements of the augmented triad, because the augmented triad is also in our hexachord. So here's our hex again. The clarinet is playing this is always the hex. So the hex is getting cycled initially in clarinet, going up to the oboe. The melody is being played by the horn and the flute in tenths. The bassoon is giving us our augmented sound. So we have the B flat and F sharp going pretty much, I'm slamming it as much as possible. So again, this is the same melodic material. We're just shifting a little bit of our emphasis. Okay. So this, as you can see, it's the same scales, right? It's the same thing, but by emphasizing the augmented sound, oh, it gives us something new. Would I have come up with this material probably on my own, this line? No, I really wouldn't. So that's what I love about experimenting with this. Now the next example is building an orchestral work from a sketch. Now it's still in our original hexachord. We have not changed it at all. So the first part is, this is what we call, this would be texture 2 if you really want to. Remember our textures we talked about? Right? Texture 1 is melody, texture 2 is harmony and bass line, texture 3 is counter melody. So this is texture 2. I often show hexachords to students who study with me because it's a way to really get some more harmonic, some more chromaticism in the writing. You know, it's so many of us are 3 chords or kind of tonal kind of writing, and that's cool. But modern writing doesn't do that. You know, modern film music, for instance, is all over the place. You know, it's shifting. Writing with hexachords and modulating the hexachord and moving through it. TV guys have been doing this thing for, you know, years and years and years, just to take material and keep moving it. But the hexachord, really, it's no different than using a scale. It's just you have a little more control of what you're building. That's really what it is. Let's listen to this. Are we good?
Yep.
Now I'm adding a texture 3, a counter melody. Remember, I just have my hexachord. So when I'm writing this, I can just have my 6 notes right there in front of me. I don't have to think about anything else. I can play the chords I want. It's very freeing when you have this sort of kind of limited material, but it's really beautiful. So I have dissonance, right? I mean, there's dissonance here, but I like that. I'm not trying to clean it up. I want to have some rubs. I want to have some things. I mean, it's dissonance that resolves. Remember, one of in essence, a lot of people might say what's happening in 20th or 21st century music is how is dissonance resolved? You have dissonance and you have consonance. It's really the thing we control, because now when we don't have to write in common practice tonality where we have dominant chords must resolve, it really becomes how do you deal with dissonance and how is it resolved? I think we should probably close that behind you, please.
Anybody got a gun?
That's better. So now I've orchestrated this, okay? And generally light character. There's no melodic doubling. You guys know me. I like the sound of a solo instruments. It's a little more pure. So here's our harp figure that is kind of, we see pretty much happening here in the left hand. You know, our initial texture 2. That's being played by the harp. The strings are doubling that. So I have the violins. I just have one violin here. Playing pizzicato, kind of playing part of the part here. There, so they're playing the F sharps. I've got the cello being a little bit more active with the left hand and the bass supporting the cello figure. I have the horns playing the texture 3. And we have the English horn, starts out with the melody. Here's texture 2, remember the texture 3 being played by the clarinet. Then the clarinet comes in and the clarinet is playing that counter melody. And here in the second section, the muted trumpets play that percussive figure. The melody it gets passed down, is linked between oboe and the bassoon. Strings play arco to provide a little more body to the sound here because it gets a little bit fuller. Okay, so this is final one. Now, it's got an interesting sound to it. I mean, this could be used for, a background to a scene, to something that's being developed. I mean, obviously in this case, it's pure music. I mean, it's not scoring to a cue, but I could easily do it that way. Now, I can also take this same material and do it in this sort of jazz fashion, and that's what I've done here. So the pitches are the same, but the rhythms are modified. I open up in the beginning, this is an introduction before the melody begins here. I've got trombones playing the chords with open voicings. I've got the melody is going to be in the sax section. I've got a piano, acoustic bass, a little drum set figure here, a little guitar. So then the saxes play the melody here in 2 octaves. The trombones are still hitting here. Coming into here, the second part, with the trumpets take the melody and end up back, the trumpets ending with the melody and the saxes kind of playing chords. So it's the same material, it's just kind of done, it's arranged for a jazz group. Same material, just arranged a little bit differently. This sounds like Steely Dan to me, this part. I don't know why. Any questions, any comments?
It's
Okay.
kind of scary.
That's the wrong comment, but no. Yeah.
It's kind of threatening, I don't know.
It's a threatening sound to you.
Yeah.
The whole piece? Or
No,
this
the
last?
first part, when you
Oh.
played it, was sounded really cool, And then when you had all the jazz, the saxes and all these other instruments, hey, wait a minute.
Okay.
I'm in
Well.
the wrong place, I better get out of here.
Well, it's not meant to be threatening. It's meant to be, inviting. But you can take it in any direction you want. I mean, that's the thing. You can write with this. It doesn't really matter how you write. It doesn't matter what genre. Now, let's talk about modulation. So modulation is really one of the composer's oldest tools. This quote from 1767. Remember back then, George? There was nice weather back that time. Yeah.
We used to go to lunch together.
Yeah, we did. It's an essential part of the art, right? Without it, there's little music, for a piece derives its true beauty not from the large number of fixed modes which it embraces, but rather from the subtle fabric of its modulation. Okay. Now, in traditional harmony era, which is what we call common era, which is pretty much before, let's say, the 1900s, the turn of the century, composers modulated because of form issues to related keys, like the dominant key or the relative minor. There were rules that had to be followed, very strict rules. And when composer modulated someplace that wasn't common, it was recognized and it was discussed, and it was something that was a little bit unusual. They modulated because the structure they were writing dictated them to do so. But nowadays, we don't have to do that, right? We don't have those rules anymore. Now, with contemporary music, we modulate or change key, not because we have to, but because we choose to. We modulate for effect, not because of rules. And modern music, modern film music, is always modulating. We have no keys, no key signatures are even used in film music anymore, because it's moving so fast, Not moving that fast, but it's always rotating, it's always moving. We don't have, very rare, unless it's a era piece for some reason, if it's hearkening back to, I don't know, some earlier time where the piece ends, you know, in a tonal chord that the piece begins in. So music is fluctuating for film music nowadays. So that's why this study is so important, to get your writing to be more flexible. Now, let's talk about modulating and counting the intervals in a major scale. So in modern music, especially with hexachords, how do we decide which key to modulate? We do this by counting the intervals in our scale or hexachord. Often people modulate, they're in a major key, they'll modulate, oh, let's go up by a third because everybody does that, you know, and it's a colorful thing. Or we go up by a whole step or a half step. The modulations often are arbitrary to my ears. You know, it doesn't really line in so much with the music. And when they modulate, how they do it doesn't seem to always be thought out. But when you look at the intervals in your material, that's going to tell you your modulation choices. Add the intervals up that are present. You don't need to write the inversion. The C major scale has 2 half steps, 5 whole steps, 4 minor thirds, 3 major thirds, 6 fourths, and 2 augmented fourths. So this is the intervals in any major scale. Okay, this is what it is. So, common tones. Common tones are notes that are shared between 2 chords in a chord progression. Okay, common tones add, when you modulate by an interval in your scale, you create common tones. The frequency of the common tones depends on the intervals in your scale. When you modulate by an interval that is present in your scale, that ends up making common tones. So for instance, there are 6 fourths in C major scale. When we modulate by fourths, we're going to have 6 common tones. I mean, those 6 pitches will still be in there. So when we go here, we go from C up a fourth, all of the half notes are common tones. Why do you think the circle of fourths is so common? It's basically the same scale, isn't it? C major and F major, what's the difference between C major and F major? Well, no, there's one pitch. There's one flat. It's B flat. So it's almost the same scale. So yeah, here we can see it. So if you're writing music that oops, let's go back here for one. No, we'll continue, I guess, a little bit. Oops. Just turn, it's a phone call. So common tones, common tones, you can use the horns to create common tones, clarinets to create common tones, strings can create common tones, and that gives you a bed of commonality. Now, if you want to, let's say you want to go something that is more drastic. Let's say you're writing a scene where somebody comes bursting in this room, right? And we need to have a lot of color. Well, then you modulate by an interval that's not common in your scale. If we go from C major to F major, there's only 2 common tones. So these are the only 2 common tones between this. So if you're writing scale figures or chords, you're going to have a lot of drastic changes, a lot of color. And that is being told us by the number of common intervals that we have, because this is the only things that are going to be common tones. So modulation can sound smooth or jagged. The smoother it is means the more common tones you have. Like I say, common tones can be played by any instruments. Usually in the orchestra, it's played by instruments like the horns or the clarinets or the violas or the cellos. You know, these mid-range instruments that give us continuity. And you have a flute line that's modulating. So after a while, whether you're writing in C major or a hex that starts in C, you've got to have some new pitches after a while. You know, you need the new color. So when you modulate it, you're going to have some notes that can be common tones and some notes that will be changes. So the major scale has 6 fourths. That's why modulating fourths has been in use for so many centuries. Also, modulating by whole steps, it has 5 common tones. C major to D major. Right? C major to D flat has, I think, probably 2 common tones. You know, and that's why it's done a lot. Up a half step, oh, everyone's excited by that. It's a lot of color. It's a lot of new pitches. Modulating by major thirds is very popular in film music. There are 3 major thirds in a major scale, so you have 3 common tones. So that becomes a lot of new color. You go from C major to E flat major. You have some common tones, but you have G sharp that you have D sharp, you have F sharp, you have G sharp, and so you have those three tones that are new, but you also have some commons. So if we modulate the C major scale, and you can see here's C, up a half step, 2 common tones, up a whole step, we have 4 common tones, or 5 common tones, up a minor third, we have 4, up a major third, we have 2 common tones. Up a fourth, we have 6 common tones. And up an augmented fourth, we have 2 common tones. So this same concept is what we're going to do when we use hexachords, when we do this with hexachords. So here's our hexachord. We have 3 half steps, we have 1 whole step, we have 3 minor thirds, 4 major thirds, and 3 fourths, augmented fourths. By the way, the inversions are all this. You don't need to do the inversions. You don't need to do major sixths, minor sixths, and fifths, because it's the same. You don't need to do sevenths or something like that. You just do one part of the inversion. So I have a predominance of major thirds in my hex, don't I? So when I modulate this, this is what I get. I go up. I have 3 common tones. I have 1 common tone. I have 3. I have 4. I have 3. And I have 1. So what's the most colorful modulation that I can do?
Fourth?
Which kind of fourth?
Augmented.
Augmented fourth, right. I only have 1. Or up a whole step. That's going to give me a whole bunch of new color. This means I'm keeping my hexachord. I'm keeping the sound of this. I'm keeping the 2 major triads. I like this interval sound of my hexachord. The same thing when you're writing in a major scale. Why are you writing in a major scale? Because you like the sound of the intervals in a major scale. There's nothing that's built in a major scale that means you must write music with it. But so if you're writing in C major, you're saying, I like to write in major because I like the melodies that C major is giving me, or any major scale. That has to be the only reason, right? We like the melodies or the harmonies that are coming from our material. So it's the same thing with the hexachord. If I like the sound of this hex, and I can have another hex later on in my piece, right? I don't have to stay in the same hex. Well, if I like the hex, I can use it, but I have to learn how to modulate it. So we have 3, 3, 4. 3. So let's look at a piece here. Now this is whole step modulation. Now I start here. Here's our original hex. Measure 1, measure 2, I modulate up a whole step with 1 common tone, A in the bassoon. See how I use this to kind of tie it over? So I'm using this as a common tone to connect this. Measure 3, I modulate back down to our original. And then here is our common tone A again. So I have a common tone here that I'm using in the bassoon, and I have a common tone here that I'm using in the clarinet. Okay, let's listen to this one, please. That's my same hex, right? That's the same hex. I've just done some modulation, so I have some new sounds in there. It sounds dissonant, right?
Yes.
It sounds scary. George is frightened right now by this piece. But this could be, a beautiful opening to any gosh darn thing I wanted. Opening to some sort of a scene. Now here is major third modulation. This first 6 measures begin with our original hex here. Now the bassoon is playing all notes of the hex, and as the clarinet is, in duplicating pitches. We have the melody is being played here in octaves by the flute and the oboe. In measure 7, we modulate up a major third with 4 common tones. So this piece is going to sound a lot more connected because I have more common tones. I'm modulating by much more of a present common tone. Measure 9, I modulate down a major third, and there are 4 common tones. Right there. So let's listen to this, Chasing Dragons. So you see what's happening? It's not Beethoven, right? But it's some interesting kind of material to work with. It's something a little bit different. It's giving me some interesting choices. I mean, even this hex, which I like. I mean, I've got F sharps and Gs and B flats. I've got some interesting tones that just are not kind of my normal thing that I might just stumble upon on the piano. And by modulating by these intervals that are very common, then it gives me this connection. And I like these instruments that are holding over. Remember, when you use common tones, often what happens, it's like a pad. Remember we talked about pads last week? Common tones are like pads, and your material starts to get stretched out. Not everything always changing on the downbeat. Lots of people's music, everything is always changing. And you don't have any big phrases because there's no connectings. There's no like two measure holdover notes. Now, okay, thank you. Let's say we want to add a pitch to the hex. Let's say Tom Peters, well-known bassist, contrabass. Let's say he says to me, well, I like the hexachords, but I want 7 pitches. I want to be like a major scale. Why should I limit myself to 6 pitches? I say that's a very good question, Tom, but don't ask it again. No, I would say it's a good question. Okay, so how are we going to do that? How are we going to figure that out? It's very easy. This is what you do. You make what's called a harmonic environment. Okay, you put your hexachord here in the middle, and you stack fifths, is what we call it. So you have 2 fifths above each hexachord and 2 fifths below. By the way, this can be any material. Let's say you write a melody that has 3 notes. Boo-doo-dee, boo-doo-dee, boo-doo-dee. You come to me and you say, here's my melody. What do I do with it? Well, I would do the same thing like this. By doing harmonic environment and by looking at the intervals. If this is all our melody, if we just have a little melody here, well, we'd say, okay, we've got a whole step and a minor third. So if we modulate by a whole step, we're going to have a common tone. So the point is the analysis of the intervals can work in any material you have. And the same thing with this. So what does this tell us? Why do we do fifths? Because fifths create harmony. They're just a harmonic interval. So here's our original hex. These are the higher fifths. Now we see that there's several duplicated pitches. So the duplicated pitches are the half notes. They're most integral to the sound of our hex. We have duplicated pitches here and we have duplicated pitches here, don't we? What pitches are duplicated up here? A, right? A is duplicated, right? We have two A. We already have A in the hex. We don't need A, right? E and F are duplicated. Okay, so those are some new pitches here. On the bottom fifth, we have 3 pitches as well. We've got C natural, we don't have C. Okay, we've got G, we have G, so we don't need that. And we've got A flat. So what does that tell us? That tells us that we can add any of those 4 pitches to the hex and still kind of keeping somewhat the integrity of the hex. Now, if you want more chromaticism, you tend to take a higher hex, note from a higher part of the upper fifths. If you want more stability, you take from the lower fifths. Now why, every time I do this people say why. I'll show you why I say that. Let's do it with C major. Same thing, okay? Here's the C major. We build upper fifths and lower fifths. Right? Everybody knows the major scale, don't they? Bill knows the major scale. He said to me, Norman, I know the major scale. I don't want to hear about it anymore. I said, I'm sorry. Okay, now we have upper fifths. What's the upper fifth that gets created? We have only 1 duplicated. It's F sharp. That's the only duplicated pitch that comes. And we have 1 in the bottom, B flat. So we know intuitively that if we add an F sharp to C major, we're starting a Lydian sound, right? We're moving in the direction of G major. If we add a B flat to the C major, we're going in dominant sound. It becomes a dominant chord. It's going to F. So that's why, in essence, you can say the higher fifth adds more color. It adds a, plus 11 is that kind of a thing, or something like that. So it's adding a upper kind of a partial, and the B flat is moving it more in a sort of tonality direction, or is a more dominant chord. So that's why when I say when you're picking from the higher, it tends to be colorful, and the lower, it tends to be more harmonic. But of course, you can add anything you want, right? I mean, whatever it is you want. Like back to our example back here, boom, boom, boom. You can add any of the, of course you can add any pitch you want. I mean, you know, you can do what you want. But you can add E or F, it does depend. You have to play the scale and see what you want. If you add E natural, you're getting this half step. You add F, you get this half step. You add C, you get a whole step. So what I chose to move on with this is I'm going to choose C natural. Okay, so I'm adding C natural to this next piece. I've added C natural from the lower fifths. So it's a little bit more stable. So now I've got, my scale is a 7-note scale, just like a normal major or minor scale. Okay, the chief difference is I have a scale that's more diverse and colorful than if I've simply chosen D major or E flat major. Right? I know the scale, I've analyzed the scale, I know what chords are in the scale. I mean, I haven't done my chords with C natural. I could do that too, right? If we had time, we could put C natural as a bass note. We're going to end up with a Lydian type scale, a +5, because we have the, or +4, we have the F sharp. It's going to be a sort of a C7 with a raised 4 in there. So we could do all that work. We know what the intervals are. We've studied our material. Now this piece is going, it's saved for woodwind quintet. We start in our beginning, our initial hex here. Then we modulate up a perfect fourth. We have 3 common tones. Then we go a major third lower than our original scale with 4 common tones. And then letter F, we go back to our original scale. I use dovetailing as much as I can. And what I try to do, oh, look at that, isn't that pretty? Forgot about all that. And it's a variation, it's a theme and variations in a sense. And so what I do is each time the instrument plays, I try to write the part that to show off the instrument's ability as much as I can. And that's, I think, is a good approach. And that, how do I know how to do this, or what are my choices? Well, because I sit with an orchestration book for many, many years. And that's why I can have an idea of the flexibility. This is our last piece in here. So let's listen to this. It's called What's This Now? So, in conclusion, I recommend, you try to include these in your writings. I mean, we looked at hexachords quite a bit. We looked at some modes. I'd like to look at modes some more. The material out there on modes is significant. There's many, like I said, there's more synthetic scales, there's more variations of modes. Really, if you can add it into your regular writing, you'll find that it will start to give your writing something a little bit different than probably what you're starting with. So the easiest way to begin, like I say, is to expand, try to be more effective with the audience, thanking you, of course. But, just the best way to start with it, like I say, is just to play around with some scales, write them down, try to follow some of this, and you'll find that your writing, it starts to add another dimension to it. It certainly did for me. So thank you very much today. Enjoyed it. Any questions? Thank you. Thank you.